I think the cruelest thing about avoidance is not the withdrawal or the emotional unavailability or even the hot and cold behavior that makes you question your sanity for months. It's what they do in the final moments when they realize they've actually lost you, when they finally understand that you're not just temporarily upset or creating distance to get their attention or going through a phase that will pass if they just wait it out, when they recognize you're actually done, genuinely, completely, irreversibly done. You've stopped pursuing. You've stopped expressing your needs. You've stopped trying to make them understand. You've stopped waiting for them to change. You've stopped organizing your emotional life around whether they're present or distant, warm or cold, available or withdrawn. You've moved from hoping they'll be different to accepting they won't be different, to actively building life that doesn't include them. And in this moment, this recognition that they've actually lost you, that the ending is real, that you're not coming back, something shifts in the avoidant. Not growth, not self-awareness, not genuine remorse that leads to authentic change. What shifts is their strategy. Because the avoidant, who couldn't give you consistent presence when you were asking for it, who couldn't provide emotional availability when you needed it, who couldn't commit when commitment was what the relationship required, this same avoidant suddenly becomes capable of the most calculated, most manipulative, most devastating final move, designed not to win you back through genuine change, but to destabilize you enough that you question your decision to leave, doubt your perception of what happened, and potentially return to the exact dynamic that was destroying you. I think this final move is their dirtiest play, because it comes precisely when you've done the hardest work of your life, the work of accepting that someone you love cannot meet your needs, the work of choosing yourself over the relationship, the work of building the strength to actually leave despite your feelings, the work of maintaining your boundaries despite the pain of the loss. You've climbed the mountain. You've reached the summit of your own self-protection and self-worth. And it's at this exact moment when you're most vulnerable, precisely because you've invested everything in this decision and you're still raw from making it, that they deploy their most sophisticated manipulation. Not the obvious manipulation you learn to recognize during the relationship, not the patterns you develop defenses against, but something different. Something that seems like what you always wanted, something that looks like the growth or the realization or the change you spent months or years hoping for. Something designed to make you believe that your leaving finally created the conditions for them to become who you always needed them to be, that the ending was the catalyst for their transformation, that if you just give them one more chance, they can finally provide what they couldn't provide before. And I think the reason this final move is so effective, so dangerous, is because it arrives at the exact moment when part of you wants desperately to believe it's real, wants to believe your suffering wasn't for nothing, wants to believe the person you loved is finally becoming capable of loving you back the way you need to be loved. The final move works because it offers you exactly what you wanted most, wrapped in packaging that makes it seem like your boundary setting and your leaving accomplished what your previous efforts couldn't accomplish. But here's what I know after watching this pattern repeat across hundreds of avoidant relationships. The final move is almost never genuine transformation. It's almost always last-ditch attempt to restore the dynamic they lost, to regain the control they had when you were pursuing them, to bring you back into the relationship where your renewed hope will allow them to return to their patterns once the crisis of your leaving has passed and they feel safe enough to withdraw again. Understanding what this final move looks like, why they deploy it at this specific moment, and how to recognize it for what it is rather than for what it appears to be. This understanding is what protects you from undoing all the work you did to leave, from returning to the situation that was damaging you, from losing more months or years to someone whose patterns haven't actually changed, despite the convincing performance they're currently offering. What the final move actually looks like and why it appears at this specific moment. The avoidance final move isn't random behavior. It's strategic response deployed at specific moment when they recognize they've lost control and they need to regain it before you're completely beyond their reach. Understanding what this move looks like helps you recognize it when it arrives. They suddenly become everything you always needed them to be: emotionally available, consistently present, verbally affirmative, physically affectionate, showing you the version of themselves you begged for throughout the relationship, but never received until now. The avoidant who couldn't text you back consistently is suddenly initiating contact multiple times per day. The person who couldn't tell you how they felt is suddenly expressing feelings in ways that seem vulnerable and genuine. The one who couldn't make plans in advance is suddenly talking about future with specificity and enthusiasm. The partner who was physically distant is suddenly initiating affection and intimacy. They're giving you everything the relationship was missing: attention, validation, presence, commitment, emotional availability, future planning. This sudden transformation is jarring because it's so dramatically different from their previous behavior, and it arrives at precisely the moment when you've fully committed to leaving, when you've accepted they couldn't give you these things, when you've made peace with the loss and started building life without them. The timing isn't coincidental. They're offering what you needed specifically because you've stopped needing it from them, specifically because your leaving proved you're serious, specifically because this is the only strategy left that might work to bring you back. They engage in grand gestures or declarations that would have resolved so many relationship issues if they'd been willing to make these gestures earlier when you were asking for them. Maybe they're suddenly willing to commit to the things they previously refused: moving in together, meeting your family, integrating their life with yours in public, visible ways, making the relationship official in whatever ways they'd been withholding. Maybe they're making grand romantic gestures, showing up at your door with flowers or gifts, planning elaborate dates, writing long letters or messages expressing everything you wanted to hear from them, making public declarations of their feelings, doing things that demonstrate effort and investment that was completely absent throughout the actual relationship. These gestures are designed to overwhelm your logical assessment of the situation with emotional impact. They're showing you through actions that they're willing to do what you needed, that they understand now what the relationship required, that they're ready to give it to you. And the part of you that spent months or years wishing they would make these gestures, that interpreted their refusal to make them as evidence they didn't care enough, that left partially because these gestures never came. This part of you wants desperately to believe the gestures mean something now, means they finally realized your worth, means they're finally ready. They claim to have had major breakthrough or revelation about their patterns and about what you meant to them, framing your leaving as the wake-up call that finally made them see what they were too defended to see before. The narrative they present is compelling because it's the exact narrative you've been hoping for. Losing you made me realize what my patterns were costing me. I couldn't see it before, but I see it clearly now. You were right about everything. I took you for granted. I didn't appreciate what I had. I was too afraid to be vulnerable, but losing you has changed me. I understand now what you were trying to tell me. I understand now what I need to work on. I'm different now because of what losing you taught me. This narrative is seductive because it validates everything you experienced, confirms your perceptions were accurate, confirms they were the problem, confirms you were justified in leaving, and it offers hope that your leaving accomplished what your staying couldn't accomplish, that the loss finally created the conditions for genuine change. The narrative positions you as the catalyst for their growth, makes your suffering meaningful by framing it as necessary for their awakening, and suggests that reconciliation would be different because they've fundamentally shifted. They provide evidence of change that seems substantial. Therapy appointments, books about attachment they're reading, specific behavioral changes they've implemented, detailed plans for addressing their patterns. Unlike previous times when their promises were empty words, now they're backing up the promises with apparent evidence. They show you the therapist's business card. They send you photos of the self-help books they're reading with passages highlighted. They describe specific insights they've gained about their attachment style. They detail the behavioral changes they've already made, not just promises about future, but apparent actions they've already taken. They might involve you in their healing process, asking you to read articles with them about attachment, sharing what they're learning in therapy, requesting your input on their growth plan. This evidence feels different from previous empty promises because it's concrete, it's detailed, it's demonstrating investment of time and energy and money into addressing the issues. And because you've probably told them many times that they need therapy or need to address their patterns, seeing them apparently doing exactly what you suggested feels like validation that you were right and that they've finally heard you and that real change is possible. They become vulnerable in ways they never allowed themselves to be vulnerable during the relationship, sharing fears and wounds and apologies that make them seem finally emotionally available and self-aware. The avoidant who never showed emotion is suddenly crying. The person who never apologized is offering detailed, specific apologies. The one who never shared their vulnerabilities is opening up about their childhood wounds, their fears, their regrets, their pain about losing you. This vulnerability is powerful because it's what was missing throughout the relationship. You wanted them to be emotionally available. You wanted them to share what they were feeling. You wanted them to acknowledge their patterns and their wounds. Now, they're doing exactly that. They're telling you about the abandonment they experienced as children that created their attachment wounds. They're explaining how their fear of intimacy developed and why they pushed you away. They're acknowledging specifically how their behavior hurt you. This vulnerability creates sense that they finally dropped their defenses, that you're finally seeing their real self, that the emotional availability you needed is finally being offered. They create sense of urgency around reconciliation, suggesting that this window of openness and growth won't last forever, that you need to act now to benefit from their newfound capacity, that waiting risks losing the opportunity. They might frame it explicitly. I'm in this growth phase right now, and I want to do this work with you, but I can't guarantee I'll stay in this open place if you don't give me another chance. Or the urgency might be more subtle. They're moving away soon, or they've been offered a job elsewhere, or circumstances are changing that will make reconciliation harder if you don't decide now. They might mention that others are interested in them, not as direct threat, but as information that suggests they won't remain available indefinitely. The urgency is designed to prevent you from taking the time you need to assess whether their change is genuine or whether this is manipulation. It's designed to make you act on emotion rather than logic, to make you grab the opportunity before it disappears, rather than carefully evaluating whether the opportunity is real. The urgency is the mechanism that pushes you to return before you've had time to see whether their apparent change sustains or whether it's temporary performance. Why this final move is more dangerous than any previous manipulation they employed. The avoidance final move isn't just another manipulation in a series of manipulations. It's qualitatively different from everything that came before in ways that make it uniquely dangerous and uniquely likely to succeed in pulling you back into the dynamic you worked so hard to escape. It arrives at a moment of maximum vulnerability when you've invested everything in leaving and your defenses are organized around protecting yourself from their old patterns, not from this new sophisticated approach. You built defenses during the relationship. You learned to recognize their withdrawal. You learned to protect yourself from their hot and cold behavior. You learned not to believe their empty promises. These defenses were adequate for managing the relationship. Because you've just done the extraordinarily difficult work of leaving, you're emotionally exhausted, you're grieving, you're in vulnerable state where part of you desperately wants to believe that leaving was unnecessary, that they've changed, that you can have what you wanted without having to accept the permanent loss. The move offers you exactly what you wanted most in packaging that makes it seem like your boundary setting finally worked, creating illusion that the pain and the leaving weren't for nothing, but were necessary catalysts for their transformation. Throughout the relationship, you tried everything to get them to change. You communicated your needs. You expressed your pain. You explained their patterns. You gave them chances. Nothing worked. They didn't change. Eventually you left, not because you wanted to, but because you accepted that they couldn't or wouldn't give you what you needed. Now they're showing up, offering exactly what you needed. The interpretation this invites is seductive. Your leaving worked. Your boundary setting was effective. The pain was necessary. They needed to lose you to realize your value. This interpretation makes the suffering meaningful, makes the leaving justified, makes reconciliation feel like reward for the difficult choice you made. But this interpretation is exactly what the manipulation is designed to create. The truth is simpler and more devastating. They're offering what you needed, not because they've changed, but because offering it is the only strategy left for getting you back. And once you're back, the offer will be withdrawn and the old patterns will return. Because the offer was never genuine transformation. It was strategic manipulation deployed at moment of maximum effectiveness. It exploits your hope and your love in ways their previous behavior didn't exploit. Now they're not just triggering your anxiety, they're activating your deepest wishes about what the relationship could be. Previous manipulation triggered your fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of loss, fear that you weren't good enough. Those fears kept you trapped, but they also kept you miserable. The final move is more sophisticated because it doesn't trigger fear. It triggers hope. Hope that they've finally become capable of loving you properly. Hope that the relationship can finally be what you always knew it could be. Hope that your patience and your love weren't wasted, but were seeds that are finally bearing fruit. Hope that you can have the person you love and the healthy relationship you need. Hope is more powerful than fear for keeping you engaged because hope feels good. It doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like possibility. It feels like dreams coming true. And because you love them, because you've always loved them, the possibility of having them and having them be different is so appealing that you want to believe it's real, even when logical part of your mind is raising warning flags. The apparent evidence they provide makes the manipulation harder to see because it's not just words anymore, but seems to be backed by actions that demonstrate genuine effort. Empty promises are easy to dismiss once you've heard enough of them. I'll change means nothing. After the fifth time it's said, without corresponding action. But therapy appointments aren't just words. Books about attachment aren't just promises. Detailed, vulnerable conversations about their wounds aren't empty statements. These feel like evidence, and evidence is what you needed to believe change was possible. The manipulation works specifically because it's not just repeating what didn't work before. It's providing what seems like proof that this time is different. The evidence makes it harder for your logical mind to dismiss what's happening as just another manipulation cycle. The evidence makes friends and family less certain in their advice to stay away. The evidence makes you question whether maintaining your boundary is actually self-protection or is self-sabotage that's preventing you from accepting genuine change. The evidence is the mechanism that makes the manipulation sophisticated enough to bypass your defenses and your support system's warnings. They're timing the move to intercept you before you've fully healed, catching you when you're still emotionally connected, still grieving, still in the stage where reconciliation feels possible rather than waiting until you've moved on completely. If they waited 6 months or a year, you'd be in a different place emotionally. You'd have grieved, you'd have healed, you'd have rebuilt your life in ways that don't include them. You'd possibly have moved on to someone else. You'd be less likely to believe their performance because you'd have emotional distance and clarity that time and healing provide. But they're not waiting. They're making their move now, while you're still raw from leaving, while you still love them actively rather than as past tense memory, while the grief is fresh and the loss is painful, and part of you is desperately wishing you didn't have to lose them, wishing there was a way to have the relationship work. The timing is strategic. They're catching you when you're most susceptible, when you haven't yet completed the grief process, when you're still in the stage where you do almost anything to make the pain stop, when the possibility of having them back sounds like relief rather than like returning to the source of pain. The timing is calculated to maximize likelihood that you'll return before you've healed enough to see their move clearly for what it is. The move is designed to transfer guilt and responsibility onto you if you don't return, framing you as the one who's refusing to accept change, who's being unforgiving, who's throwing away opportunity for genuine relationship. This is particularly insidious aspect. Throughout relationship, they were the problem. Their patterns, their emotional unavailability, their inability to meet your needs. You were the one trying, the one being patient, the one giving chances. But the final move inverts this. Now, they're supposedly trying, they're supposedly changing, they're supposedly doing the work, and you're the one saying no. This inversion attempts to transfer guilt onto you. If you don't return, you're the one rejecting someone who's trying to change. You're the one being unforgiving. You're the one throwing away potential for genuine connection because you can't let go of past hurt. You're the one being rigid and closed when they're being vulnerable and open. The guilt is designed to overwhelm your logical assessment and your self-protective instincts. It's designed to make maintaining your boundary feel like the wrong choice, like you're being petty, or holding grudges, or being unable to accept growth. And this guilt can be powerful enough to make you return, not because you believe they've changed, but because you cannot tolerate the guilt of rejecting someone who appears to be trying. How to recognize the final move as manipulation rather than genuine change. The difference between genuine transformation and sophisticated manipulation can be subtle, but specific markers help you distinguish between the two and protect yourself from being pulled back into dynamic that hasn't actually changed despite appearances. Genuine change happens slowly over a sustained period with therapy and work that occurs, whether you're watching or not. Sudden transformation that coincides exactly with your leaving is performance, not healing. Real healing from avoidant attachment patterns takes time. It requires sustained therapeutic work, not 1 or 2 sessions, but months or years of consistent therapy with a practitioner who specializes in attachment wounds. It requires practice of new behaviors in safe contexts before those behaviors become reliable in intimate relationship. It requires working through childhood wounds that created the patterns in the first place. It requires developing new neural pathways through repeated practice of different responses. This is slow work. It doesn't happen in the 2 weeks or 2 months between when you left and when they're suddenly showing up as transformed person. If their change appeared suddenly and conveniently exactly when you left, it's performance designed to get you back, not genuine transformation. Genuine change would be occurring whether you were there to witness it or not. They'd be in therapy for 6 months before reaching out. They'd have done substantial internal work before contacting you. They'd have demonstrated changed behavior in other contexts, with friends, with family, with coworkers, before trying to demonstrate it with you. Sudden change that appears exactly when it's needed to win you back is manipulation. Genuine transformation is uncomfortable and messy with setbacks and struggles. If they're presenting perfect polished version of change without acknowledging difficulty or showing any reversion to old patterns, it's not real. Real change is hard. Real growth involves setbacks. Someone genuinely working on avoidant attachment would have days where they struggle with vulnerability, would have moments where old withdrawal impulse surfaces and they have to actively work against it, would acknowledge that change is difficult and that they're not perfect at it yet, but they're committed to continuing the work. The presentation would be messy. I'm really trying, but sometimes I still feel the old fear, and I have to remind myself to stay present. I'm working with my therapist on it. Some days are harder than others. This messiness is marker of authenticity, but if they're presenting perfectly transformed version, no struggles, no setbacks, total transformation, this is performance. Real people doing real healing work are imperfect. The perfection of their presentation reveals it's not genuine work, but is strategic performance designed to be maximally convincing. They're willing to give you space and time to decide without pressure or urgency. Manipulation creates urgency because it needs you to act before you can think clearly. If their change is genuine, they understand you need time. They understand you need to see sustained change over a long period before you could possibly trust them again. They understand your skepticism is warranted given history. They would say something like, I understand you need time. I understand you need to see this sustained over months before you could trust it. I'm not asking you to come back now. I'm just telling you, I'm doing this work and I wanted you to know. Take whatever time you need. I'm going to continue this work regardless of whether you choose to give me another chance. This is what genuine change sounds like. Patient, understanding, non-pressuring, focused on doing the work for its own sake, rather than as bargaining chip for reconciliation. But if they're creating urgency, if they're suggesting you need to decide now, if they're implying the window will close, if they're making you feel like you'll miss your chance if you don't act quickly, this urgency is manipulation. They're trying to prevent you from taking the time you'd need to assess whether change is real. The change would be validated by others who know them, rather than being visible only to you, and only in context of winning you back. If their transformation is genuine, people in their life would notice. Their friends would comment on how they're different. Their family would see changes in how they relate and communicate. Their co-workers or other people in their life would observe behavioral shifts. The therapist they're supposedly seeing would be able to confirm they're doing work, and they'd be willing to give you permission to contact the therapist to verify this if you wanted. Genuine change is holistic. It affects all relationships and all contexts, not just the romantic relationship they're trying to restore. But if the change is visible only to you, only in the specific behaviors that relate to your complaints, only in the context of trying to win you back, it's targeted performance. It's them acting how they think you need them to act to get you to return. Ask about other areas of their life. Ask if their therapist would confirm what they're telling you. Ask their friends if they've noticed differences. Genuine change will be confirmed by multiple sources. Manipulation will be visible only in the context designed to convince you. They take full responsibility for the relationship ending without deflecting blame onto you or onto circumstances. Manipulation often includes subtle blame shifting, even within the apology. Listen carefully to how they talk about what happened. Genuine accountability sounds like, I destroyed something valuable through my own patterns. My fear prevented me from giving you what you needed. The relationship ended because I couldn't show up the way you deserved. This is my responsibility and my failure. No qualification. No, but you were also. No, if you had been more patient. No, the timing wasn't right. No deflection onto circumstances or your behavior. Pure ownership. But manipulation often includes subtle blame shifting within what sounds like apology. I know I had issues, but the pressure I felt from you made it harder for me to work on them. I should have communicated better, but you sometimes didn't give me space to process. These subtle shifts suggest they haven't actually taken full responsibility. They're still viewing your legitimate needs as problems, and the change isn't genuine because they haven't genuinely acknowledged what needs to change, what the final move means for you, and how to protect yourself from it. Understanding the final move doesn't just help you recognize it. Understanding helps you develop clear strategy for protecting yourself when it arrives, while still honoring any genuine possibility of change without putting yourself at risk. The appropriate response is neither immediate rejection nor immediate acceptance, but is careful assessment over extended time, while maintaining boundaries that protect you from falling back into old patterns. Don't make decision in the moment. Don't let their urgency pressure you. Take time. Tell them, if you're genuinely changing, that's wonderful. I need to see sustained change over a long period before I could consider reconciliation. I need you to do this work for yourself, not as bargaining chip for getting me back. I need space to assess this without pressure. Then maintain distance while you observe. If change is genuine, it will sustain. They'll continue therapy. They'll continue working on themselves. They'll respect your boundary about needing time and space. They'll demonstrate change behavior in contexts you can observe from distance. If change is manipulation, the performance will drop when it becomes clear it's not immediately succeeding. They'll become frustrated with your need for time. They'll pressure you to decide. They'll revert to old behaviors when the new behaviors don't quickly produce the result they wanted. Time and distance are your protection. Genuine change survives both. Manipulation doesn't. Recognize that even if some change is genuine, it may not be sufficient change to create healthy relationship or sustained enough change to be a reliable foundation for reconciliation. Even best case scenario where they've had real breakthrough and are genuinely working on themselves, this doesn't automatically mean reconciliation is right choice. Early stage change is fragile. Insight doesn't equal transformed behavior. Being in therapy doesn't mean being ready for healthy relationship. Understanding their patterns doesn't mean having developed new patterns to replace them. Even if their change is genuine in this moment, the question is whether change is deep enough and sustained enough to create different outcome than you experienced before. This assessment requires time, minimum 6 months, ideally a year, of observing sustained different behavior before you could possibly know whether change is sufficient. And even then, reconciliation means starting over slowly, with clear boundaries, with agreements about what happens when old patterns surface, with ongoing therapy for them, and possibly couples therapy for both of you. It doesn't mean jumping back into the relationship at the same level of intimacy where it was when you left. Protect yourself by requiring demonstrated sustained change over extended time before making any decision about reconciliation. Your healing and your forward movement should continue regardless of whether their change is genuine. Don't put your life on hold, waiting to see if their transformation is real. This is crucial. You left for a reason. You've started healing. You've begun building life without them. Don't stop this process because they've made their final move. Continue therapy for yourself. Continue building your support system. Continue pursuing your goals. Continue creating life that's fulfilling with or without them. Continue going on dates with other people if you're at that stage. Continue forward. If their change is genuine and sustained over long enough period that reconciliation becomes a viable option, you can consider it then from position of strength and wholeness, rather than from position of putting your life on hold, waiting for them. But if their change isn't genuine or isn't sustained, you haven't lost time. You've continued healing and building. Your forward movement is protection. Don't sacrifice it to wait for someone who may or may not actually be different this time. Remember that you don't owe them another chance even if their change is genuine. You're allowed to decide that the cost of the relationship was too high and that you're not willing to risk experiencing it again. This is important recognition. Even if every sign points to genuine change, even if they're really in therapy and really working on themselves and really different now, you still don't owe them reconciliation. The damage they caused was real. The pain they inflicted was real. The months or years you spent being hurt by their patterns were real. You're allowed to decide that you're not willing to risk experiencing that again, regardless of whether they've changed. You're allowed to decide that you deserve relationship with someone who didn't have to lose you to recognize your value, who didn't have to damage you before being motivated to address their wounds, who was capable of showing up healthily from the beginning. You're allowed to say, I'm glad you're working on yourself, but I'm not willing to be in relationship with you again. I need to move forward. This isn't punishment. This isn't being unforgiving. This is appropriate self-protection and appropriate recognition that some damage cannot be undone and some relationships shouldn't be resurrected even if growth occurs. The most powerful response is continuing to build extraordinary life that makes their change increasingly irrelevant to your happiness. You succeeding without them is a stronger statement than you returning to them because they changed. They made their final move hoping it would bring you back. The most powerful response isn't giving them what they want. It's making clear through your continued thriving that you don't need what they're offering anymore. You're building a career that fulfills you. You're developing relationships that nourish you. You're becoming more fully yourself in ways relationship with them was preventing. You're creating life that's so aligned with your values and so genuinely fulfilling that whether they've changed becomes beside the point, because you've already found what you need without them. This isn't about revenge or about proving anything to them. This is about recognizing that your life is yours, that you deserve to build something extraordinary, that their change, real or performed, doesn't obligate you to participate in their story anymore. You have your own story. You're the author, and the most powerful thing you can write is chapter where you continue becoming who you're meant to be, regardless of their final move, regardless of their transformation, regardless of anything they do or don't do. The moment an avoidant knows you're done, they reveal their dirtiest final move. And the moment you recognize that move for what it is, manipulation designed to restore their control, rather than genuine transformation that serves your well-being, you reveal your strongest self, the self that cannot be manipulated anymore, the self that cannot be pulled back into dynamics that damage you, the self that knows its worth, the self that maintains its boundaries, the self that continues building extraordinary life, whether they're in it or not. They made their move. You make yours. And your move is simple. Keep walking forward into the life you're creating and never look back.